my friends. Nice to be with you again. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about something that I've mentioned in passing before. I've mentioned it a couple of times, I think, and that is this whole business of kind of leaning forward into this whole big change. What's coming is on our horizon is nothing less than extraordinary. And it's really quite fundamental to who we are as human beings. And it's unlike anything any of us have ever experienced before. In fact, you could argue that it's unlike anything that's ever happened in recorded history. And so it's a really, really, really big deal. It's easy not to fully appreciate the significance and the importance of all of this, and particularly in terms in personal terms, because this is about rising to a new level of kind of evolution as a human being. It's the kind of a natural, if you will, or a common, apparently, acceleration into a new level of far expanded horizon awareness that ports you into a space that is dramatically different than anything that we've seen, that we understand and we know of right now. I was reminded about this a little bit this last weekend when Penny Kelly was with us. Penny Kelly came to Transition Talks and gave a very interesting and powerful talk about this new human and how you kind of become a new human and what the component parts of this new human are. She, among other things, had a whole litany, a list of kind of the characteristics of this individual, this human, this person who is actively engaged in becoming a new human. And the point she was making, and the point that I would make, is that this is not a passive process, that you cannot just read a few books and be interested in this and attend some few workshops or seminars or some other kind of thing and expect stuff to kind of rub off on you enough that you suddenly are become somebody else other than who you have been. And this is about becoming someone new and going through a very active process to do that. This is not passive. It's very active. I look at this as, I think of it to be kind of corollary. It seems to be things like when I went to college, right? And I went through these ongoing over and over and over again courses that were constantly teaching me and exposing me to ideas that I had never had before. And it was making essentially a new person out of me. I've often suggested that the shortcomings of not having a college education are largely, obviously there's some information that you need to know and so on, but there's a socialization process that comes from being in that kind of in context and learning how to get along with people. And more than that, it's this kind of every quarter, every semester business that you get to start over again and try to get better at, learn how to do this whole education thing better than you did it before. And hopefully by the end of 4 years, or however long it took me, 4.5 years, by the end of the time, you've got yourself, you've got discipline, and you've got the ability to think differently. Another thing, and you're quite a different person when you come out of the back end of that thing. There are a lot of folks, Bill Gates is, I guess, an obvious example of people who haven't made it through college and turn out to be successful in whatever terms you choose to measure success. But there's this whole socialization thing and how do you get along and whatever is really important. Same thing turned out, by the way, to be the case in the Navy. You go through boot camp in the Navy, and let me tell you, they've got you working moment after moment after moment all day long, and even into the evening, into trying to make you into someone different than you have been. And it becomes really acute when you go into the Navy flight program, because then it's this in-depth, it's 18 months of just going, and driving you further and further and further out of the box where you came from into their box, right? And getting you to the place where not only are your skills a whole lot different than they ever have been, but your sense of self fundamentally changes. Well, that in its own way, those examples are what we're up against writ large in terms of this transition. This is not some passive kind of thing, as far as I'm concerned. This is not some passive thing where you kind of hang around and every once in a while and you read a book and you come to a seminar, whatever it is, as I said. This is like active engagement. This is working on becoming someone new and someone different. And it's particularly important, I think, in terms of time, or at least it's certainly I'm influenced by this. And that is that I am constantly aware of the kind of a limited amount of time that's available to me. I'm trying my best to make it more than what the usual amount of time is that's available to human beings. But nevertheless, it's a limited amount of time, and the whole human experience is nothing less than, at its essence, how did you use the time that you had available to you, right? You get to the end of this whole experience, you get to the end of your life, and the only question is, what did you use at the time that you had? Or did you use it? Did you use it effectively? And I mean, that's the lingering idea about anybody, anytime, but it's really the case here in the middle of this extraordinary kind of transition. This is about, like, are you into this? Are you leaning into this? Are you working this one? Or are you just kind of carrying on your kind of regular life and working the edges? I'm reminded it's kind of like going to church on Sunday, right? And then you forget about it the rest of the week. That's the way I grew up. I mean, it became pretty clear to me at some point when I was in high school or something that there were a whole lot of these adults that were going to church, and the only time they thought about church was on Sunday, and then they went off and did whatever they were doing for the rest of the week. Well, this is not, this doesn't work that way. This is about becoming somebody new. This is about really becoming somebody different. This is about seeing your whole self, seeing the whole world in quite a different way. I'm kind of reminded about it some time ago. I was at a dinner party with some folks, and there were some very interesting people there. And, it could have been an extraordinary kind of conversation, and all it turned into one of these kind of things about, oh, you're from someone, and my sister came from there, and the weather was nice the last time I was there. And it was just innocuous kind of conversation that had no value. I was thinking about it that day afterwards and saying, if you asked anybody what was the conversation about, what it was this about, they'd have a hard time telling you what did they learn. Particularly if you cast it in terms of what did you learn, what did you take away from this, it would be very hard for them to try to explain what was benefited from having that time together. I've often, a number of times when I've hosted groups, I know we did it up in Spokane one night, and I had a kind of a party that I got a bunch of folks together, and they started off in this kind of conversation that was going nowhere, that had no value, and it was just stuff. And I stopped them and I said, okay, let's talk about something that's important here. Let's use our time so that there's something of value that comes out of the back end of this. I was reminded, as I was alluding to, but when Penny Kelly was here, is because she gave this list of all these kind of characteristics of folks who were moving into this new space. And one of the characteristics was no shallow talk. Shallow talk were the two words. I don't remember whether it was. Again, Steve was there, he might remember. But the idea is that to my way of thinking is that you've got limited amount of time. Let's use it. Let's use it well. And let's learn something out of this thing and let's make it valuable, because as a matter of fact, when you go into a space and you force the conversation into things that are substantive and useful, what you do is, I think, you open up the kind of the aperture for these new ideas and these new things that you need in order to make decisions going forward. I don't think it's hard for me to visualize how you get much imagery about the path forward if somebody's talking to you about what the weather was, or that their sister used to live in the same town that you used to live in, and whatever, that kind of stuff. It has no kind of substance and value. And so I'm just impressed that as this all ramps up and this accelerates, that there needs to be a focus. There needs to be a focus that starts to say, what am I doing to try to find out what the kind of the answers to life are? I mean, that's kind of like what it is. What are the answers to life, or what life is going to be, or what it's becoming, or where I've got to go, or some other kind of things? And it would surprise you, I think, what the kind of conversations you can get if you allow that to happen or encourage that to happen. It always was interesting to me when I moved to Washington, D.C., having come from Chicago, that there was a qualitative difference in the conversations at dinner parties and such things in Washington compared to Chicago. Chicago, you could have all this blah, 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 and stuff that kind of makes no difference. You come to Washington, and they're interested in ideas. This is this Washington, D.C.'s the industry of ideas. It's not money. Money is New York or something. And what industry or creativity or something is in Chicago? I don't know. You could kind of characterize different things. But in Washington, the business is ideas. And you go to a dinner party in Washington, and it cooks, because everybody is very interested in what issues are and what's going on in the world and whatever. And it is, you go away and you've learned something. You become somebody different somewhat because of all of that. And so I just would like to suggest to you all that this whole process of preparing ourselves and getting ready for this new reality, this becoming a new human, is kind of like a full-time job. And that you really need to be really very actively and thoughtfully engaged in trying to figure out what this is, because there isn't much time. I mean, the kind of potential events that they're talking about that are inbound in the next year or two should be enough to cause any and all of us to get really focused on, who we are and where we're trying to go and how do we get prepared and know all of that kind of stuff, and not waste time that you generate no significant value out of. So it's only one of a whole bunch of different kind of things that we need to do in order to kind of work our way into this new kind of space. But it is, as I would suggest, a really kind of a full-time job, and we need to get on with it. So I'll see you.